Welcome into Courtside Seats with Kroeger, a Charlotte Hornets podcast. Here he is, Chris Kroeger.
Here we are. It's episode 29 of Courtside Seats, and it's a special week because coming up by the end of this thing, December 28th, it's going to be Steve Martin bobblehead night. It's going to be Hornets and Nets, and look who's here. It's the original voice of the Hornets, Steve Martin. Steve, good to see you, my friend.
Oh, good to see you, Chris.
All right, so a little inside baseball, okay? So I told you to be here at a certain time, and then I texted you and I said, I messed up. It needs to be a little later, and you ended up showing up at the right time that I told you originally.
That's amazing.
And I said, Steve, I'm sorry. I'm wrapped up in a meeting. Just give me a few minutes. I'll be down. And you said, oh, don't worry. I'm retired now. There is no schedule.
That's right. There is no schedule. There's no bedtime. There's no lunchtime. There's, it's haven't got anything to. Oh, let's eat.
I'll do whatever I want.
It's the day's wide open.
Well, I've noticed this already just 30 games in, but it's amazing how much you become a creature of habit because everything's so regimented, right? With practice and shoot around and games and traveling. It's just amazing how you kind of get locked into that, oh, man, at this time I've got to be doing X, Y, and Z.
Well, and this business has grown to the point where, and I remember when I first got in the NBA, it was hectic to a degree, but not to the level that it is now. There are more vehicles that teams have available to themselves now, and they want you to be a part of them. And well, you should. And it's a great way to keep the team out there. So it's a 365 business now in the NBA, and I think it is really for the most part in all of professional sport. You've got to get out there and market yourself, market your product. I'm still amazed when I worked here how active this place was. We'd always take in a heavy group of interns, and we put those people to work.
Yeah.
It'd be in the middle of May.
Yep.
And they're out there, in the city center trying to sell tickets or get interest going in the Hornets. So it's a year-round business. I appreciate that. I did it for a while, and now that I've retired, it's like you've been dropped off a cliff to a degree because there's nothing, there's no schedule you have to tie yourself to. So I guess you sit there and you say, I didn't realize I worked that hard.
It's amazing. I would venture to guess like that gulf, what it goes from one end of the spectrum to the other. But
sure.
At the same time, I'm sure this has got to be the number one question you get these days is, do you still watch basketball? Do you still go to games?
Oh, yeah.
Are you around the Hornets? And I know the answer to that, but what's the answer?
Well, you can't if you work in this thing for 30 years, so you're going to 90 games a season. You're broadcasting for the most part, most of them, especially when we're on radio, doing all of them. Television, you might be missing a few games here and there, but you're still committed to all of that and the time that goes into it. You're there when they practice, every day that they practice, and so you're tied to the team, whatever they do. And then all of a sudden that goes away, and you don't have to be somewhere. So it's hard for me. I've been to about, I would say, in the 30 that we've had, I think I've been to about 8 or 9, maybe 10, and then I've only missed either on radio or television probably 5 games altogether.
That's a diehard fan right there, Steve.
So we played Cleveland the other night, and for a while in the first half, I didn't want to watch it, because it wasn't going well. Kemba missed his first 7 shots, and I'm going, well, I know how this is going to wind up. And then we turned it around in the second half, and Kemba hits his next 7, and winds up at 11 for 19, and was we're back to the old script. All right, and I like that old script. So. And it was an easy watch. And you'd be surprised if you watch it at home or listening at home how quick the game goes. You go through 2.5 hours, you don't realize you've been squatting in a chair.
So it goes
long.
Quicker to you, really, watching.
It does. It is for me, it's much quicker because, during the commercials, you turn your mind off or whatever. You'll go pull clothes out of the dryer, dishes out of the dishwasher. You conduct your family daily business. And then you sit down there, and when the breaks are coming up. We get to within 7 minutes of the end, 7 at 3, and then boom, we're gone. And You know how long they're going to be gone for, and we're going to be. Oh, this is a 2.5-minute break, so here we go. So you get into that kind of routine.
I feel like it's been the opposite for me, though. I'm amazed sometimes where I feel like the ball goes in the air and then the whistle blows at the end of the game, and I'm thinking, where did the last 2 hours of my life go? Like that just happened in the blink of an eye. I'm actually amazed sometimes at how quickly a game, and I guess that's probably a testament to this league of you better take every minute for granted in these games, because I know you say it's for 4 quarters, but man, things can you'll blink and you'll miss it sometimes during one of these games.
You sit there and you say, well, you think of the enormity of the next 2.5 hours. They're all going to hear me.
Mm-hmm.
I better have something ready to go. And initially you sit there and go, if you don't have somebody working with you, and that was typically the case when we were on the road, what the heck am I going to fill this with? And you get to the end of the night and said, I wonder why that was a problem. Because the games have a rhythm to them.
Mm-hmm.
The breaks are here, and you do this there. The thing that was the hardest for me was to sit there and do a game play-by-play, great finish. All right, get your butt down to the locker room,
yes.
And let's do this and that and this and that. And then it's hurry up and wait. And then and in some places that's very difficult to do. You ever do a game Madison Square Garden? I mean,
you're way up in the rafters.
Yeah, you get down to the locker room, you can't get back.
Yeah.
Because by the time you get back, they're all left, and your broadcast position is technically, the access to it is outside the building.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't get there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So all your stuff is up there, and you got to go get it. So you got to find a security guard. He's got to open the door. You got to get on the right elevator, and it's, so you barely make the bus on the way out, and if you make it at all. But so it's different in some places. It's very, very different, and you're on a different pace once the game ends. It's a totally different, and it's very frustrating because.
Did you ever feel like because I've noticed this already for me, did you ever feel like you get off the air some nights? Because we critique ourselves just like players,
mm-hmm.
right? And I've noticed this already. I actually felt this way last night. For whatever reason, and I haven't been able to figure this out yet, so I need your answer on this. Things just go well, right? For whatever reason, you felt like you were on top of the action.
Uh-huh.
Your banter with your color analyst was great. Your prep was great. All the imaging played properly, right? Like you just had a tight broadcast, and I felt that way last night. I got off the air and I thought, you know what? In our 30 games so far, that's probably one of the 5 best broadcasts we did. But I can't put my finger on that. Have you noticed? Did you notice that throughout your career where you're like, you know what? I did a better game tonight than I did maybe 2 nights ago.
Well, last night's game had a certain rhythm that was very favorable,
Mm-hmm.
although it didn't seem that way in the first half. I mean, you're talking about a woebegone story at halftime, and then all of a sudden, in the third quarter, things just woke up. Everything went right. And the other team did what they were supposed to do, what all 8 and 28 teams do, or whatever it is, 8 and 24.
8 and 23. 8 and 24 now.
Yeah, 8 and 24 now. Well, they eventually they will, if you are consistent in what your team does, then you should go in against an 8 and 23 team and behave accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably been that's got to be coaches' biggest problem right now is what is accordingly. What is we win one, we lose one. Where is the point where you're going to run off 5 straight wins?
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you were looking at the schedule, this was the time when that was going to happen.
Yep.
And to be 1-2 going into the game against Cleveland, to be 1-2 at that point in time had to be the most frustrating thing, not only on the coaches' minds, obviously, but in the players' minds. Because you're sitting there and you're looking at this stretch and going, man, there isn't a game we should lose in this stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And now here you are, and you've got to win one more to make it an above 500 trip at home, because that's what you're supposed to do.
Yep.
Defend your home court, no matter what your record is and where you think your level is. And the Hornets are at a certain level now where you have a reasonable expectation that when a team comes in and they are 8 and 23. Things should go accordingly. And unfortunately, some of those teams, and Atlanta would be another team like that, where they will expose a particular weakness in the way that you play.
Mm-hmm.
And you sometimes, the maddening thing about this whole business is, and the business that we're in, is that you can't sit there and somebody say, boy, isn't that amazing that they lost that game? No, I can certainly see a scenario that would see us losing that game. And here's why.
It's amazing, though, too, because Atlanta's a great example because it's happened twice this year. And this is who they are as a team. They suck you into their style of play, right? Exactly. And I've noticed that as a broadcaster. You're right. There's a certain tempo and urgency and intensity that you can feel from the court, and you're able to try to translate it through the radio, right? But I've also noticed in those games where that doesn't exist, it kind of sucks you into it, too. And you, as a broadcaster, you've got to push back on that.
You know. You've spent time with this team. You know what the coaching staff is telling the team. You know what the team is feeding back to you when you talk to them. And when it doesn't happen the way it should, and the margin of error for teams that are where the Hornets are right now, here in the middle of the pack, is very small. You go to places where they're traditionally strong with San Antonio and some of these other teams. They never have this type of problem. It's where Popovich can walk in and rest 4 guys just for the sake of resting them because it's game 32, and I don't want them with 82 games on their back. So and he'll get away with it. But teams that are here in the middle and trying to they can't do that.
No, it's a grind. It's every single night.
It is a grind, and everybody has to perform. And when you look at how this team is constructed right now, and you look how good Kemba is and can be, but you understand that he can't do it alone. And yet, is there anybody who's at his level? No. But there are people who the sum of all those parts can make his job a lot easier. And I think the way, especially as this team is constructed now, Tony Parker can be a great assist to Kemba, and that's something that he hasn't really had in his time here with the Hornets, and before that the Bobcats. So that's something that's in your favor every time that you go out with a guy with that type of experience at that position, one of the hardest positions on the floor.
So when you were growing up in Maine, where were you born in Maine? Where did you grow up?
I was in eastern Maine. I was in the Bangor area, and then we moved north of that to a place called Millinocket, which is in north-central Maine. It's just south of the tail end of the Appalachian Trail.
Okay.
Mount Katahdin. We still have a summer camp up there that we've had for 47 years, and it's 7 miles from Mount Katahdin. So, and unlike the rest of the state of Maine, we're surrounded by Canada.
Yeah.
So
Jay Triano approves of that, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The flights that we see going overhead are not from New York or Boston. They're from Toronto or Montreal.
That's wild.
And they're going either to the Maritimes or they're going across the ocean.
So when you were growing up, would you have ever dreamed of working in the NBA? Was basketball a love for you, a passion for you as a kid?
Yes. I mean, basketball is very big in Maine, and in particular. High school basketball is huge. And
because people, I think, just assume hockey, right? Hockey is huge, obviously, in Maine.
There are only 6 schools in the state of Maine. When I was in school, there were only 6 schools in the state of Maine that played hockey, and they were all in the southern end of the state.
Okay. So basketball's a big passion
is a
in Maine.
big thing. It's the passion, and it's funny. Steve Clifford, who was the former coach here, he's a product of Maine high school basketball, and and there was a school that he worked at over a place called Woodland, which is close to the Canadian border on the east, and he built them into a little powerhouse.
And Brett Brown's father coached in Maine, correct?
Exactly. Brett Brown's father was a longtime coach in Maine, and a legend, really. He coached at a place called Rockland, and they were a moribund school in basketball, and he brought them up from nothing. He took a school in the greater Portland area, Cheverus, which was a shrinking enrollment and all that, and it was a Catholic school, and built that into a powerhouse. I mean, everything Bob Brown has touched has turned out very, very well.
So if you grow up in Maine, then you have a reverence for the game of basketball, right? You're not just a fan; you have a true reverence for the sport and the history of it.
Yeah. The only thing about Maine basketball is that when I grew up, you wouldn't find a kid over 6'3" or 6'4".
Okay.
Playing. I mean, there really wasn't. But it was the place that I grew up in high school. There was a it was a basketball town, and it's all it was their pro team. The basketball players could go anywhere they wanted in town, and it was really neat. And they won. We had a coach by the guy's name was George Wentworth, and he was a Notre Dame graduate, but he was from a place called Bucksport, Maine, or as they say in Maine, Bucksport. And he was and he had the thickest Maine accent you could, but he was a genius at basketball, and he recruited kids in 8th grade and molded his teams from there. And by the time they became, if you didn't make junior varsity your freshman year, that was it. You're bound for intramurals, and that's as far as you're going to get.
So let's pause for a second. You spent almost how many years? Your first 20, 22 years of your life in Maine, right?
Longer 29.
Than that. 29.
Yeah, I started work when I was, I don't know how it is in everywhere else, but in Maine, for instance, I was in 8th grade, and the guidance department said, okay, we're going to have a career day. You're going to figure out while you're in March of your 8th grade year what you want to do for the rest of your life. And one of I looked at the list of occupations that they had in radio, television. Well, I'd always had an interest in radio and television since I was very, very young. I mean, I had to be one of the only 5-year-olds who had a picture window in the front of his house and had his own television variety show. So I was well prepared to meet the challenge when somebody says, you might be able to be a radio or TV announcer at some point in your life in 8th grade. So I went to the career day, and I went to the radio television presentation. There was about 8 in the class, and this is in March of that year. And then when school got done, it was June 18th, 1968, and I got a call at about 9 in the morning from the general manager of the station who made the presentation that day in that class, 3 months earlier. And he said, how would you like to come up and talk about working on the radio? I'm not even in high school yet. Of course, before the phone hung up, I'm in the car. Of course, I don't have a license, so Mom's going to drive me to the station. But and so I went up to the station, and that was it. A week later, I'm on the air.
On the air.
On the air.
At that age.
And they had the thing is that they needed there aren't too many people who go through Millinocket, Maine, and stay there. You can't get a guy out of broadcasting school and say, I'm going to spend the rest of my life at this radio station. Well, no, that's not going to happen. So what they did was they tried to get early in high school, and can't get any earlier than freshman year coming up. And they got 2 of us. They hired 2 of us out of that presentation. And that's the business that I got into and stayed into.
And you went to Maine, though, right? You went to college.
I went to the University of Maine. The station changed hands, and so the first year I worked there, I worked 77 straight days. They had 2 announcers working 16 hours, 8 hours on the air, and then 2 or 3 hours doing production, selling advertising, all that stuff. It was really quite tough on those guys. So what they did is they hired this other kid and I to fill in the other hours of the day. So I would come in at 12, and I'd work till 3 on the air.
In the afternoon or morning?
In the afternoon. Well, so the guy who opened up in the morning, he'd go out and sell and then come back and produce spots. And the guy who would come on at 3 and he would work till about 7:30. I'd come back in. We had a Red Sox station. So all I had to do was just sit there and put commercials in. So that's what I did. And then signed the station off as soon as the Red Sox game was over, about 10:30, signed the station off.
But there are people, and I'm too young to know what this was like, but I'm aware that it happened. But there are people that don't know that actually was a thing, that TV and radio stations literally used to sign off the air at night and then sign back on a few hours later for the next day.
Exactly. Yeah, we would. You want to make sure. Yeah, funny little story. I was in my second job, I worked in Bangor, Maine, about 60, 70 miles south. And I was working afternoons. I was full-time. Working afternoons and then Saturday mornings. So one thing you didn't want to have happen is that you're supposed to be on the air at 5:43 on Saturday morning to sign the station on. You got to make sure that station doesn't sign on and you're not there. And we had a guy who was really he was Mr. Radio Station. And so if you didn't show up at a certain time, he'd be on a country station that was in the same building. He'd sign his station on, and then he'd sign yours on for you. So I'm going to work, and I just happened to be tuning the radio station, and all of a sudden I hear the carrier go on. I'm going, oh no, I'm a mile away from the station, and the carrier, that means the transmitter is on, but there's no program. And then all of a sudden I hear da 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 the national anthem. I'm not there. I'm in the car. So utterly embarrassed. I walked in, and I was only about 90 seconds late, but just the same, the guy would like to rub it in.
Well, you would never make that mistake again.
Oh no,
right?
Never did.
Yeah,
not after that, boy. I tell you what.
So, what was your first job doing sports and radio in some capacity?
Well, the thing is sports was not the route I wanted to take. I wanted to be the midday guy at WBZ in Boston. That was my aim. I wanted to be on the air. But radio, I was behind the times in radio. I mean, I was born a little too late.
How so?
Well, because personality radio was a big thing in the 50s and 60s. Well, it really from the time radio exploded as a medium. But it started to change. You didn't have anything. There wasn't sports talk. There wasn't news. There wasn't news talk or any of that. You were talking about personality-driven radio, where you had records, you told stories, you were a companion more than an informer most of the day, and that's how radio was for a very, very long time. And I liked that, but I couldn't get out of Bangor doing that. I tried to get to Port because I figured you go Bangor, you go to Portland, then you're in Boston. Bam, you're out. And the world's your oyster at that point, right? And I couldn't get out. I just couldn't get out of my way. And then finally, I decided, I was dabbling in. I was doing a 4-hour radio shift, a 2-hour production shift. Spent about an hour going out gathering sports stories, and then doing the 6 o'clock news on television on sports. And that proved to be my ticket out. Because when I turned my attention to going on sports on television, bam, I'm out of there in a hurry. Next thing you know,
people took notice.
Yeah, I went from WABI Bangor to WBT in Charlotte, just like that. Boom.
They reached out to you. WBT.
They did. I was second. I was the guy. I applied for the job at WBT, and I was not the guy they chose. I was a second choice. The first guy, and it's funny, I saw him on Fox Sports Southeast has this thing about this Fran Healy. He was the guy that they offered the job to first, and they're promoting one of his talk shows on Fox Sports Southeast. I nearly fainted the other day. I'm going, that's Fran Healy. That's the guy that was supposed to get my job.
So he turned it down.
He turned it down. And so the sports director, Paul Ingalls, turned in my direction. And they brought me down, and boom.
Was at that time John Kilgo? Was he the program director at that time?
He was on what they call Big Ways.
Yeah, 610, which is now FNZ.
Yes, and he was he was doing. John's an amazing personality. I mean, he's so well versed. He could be well versed. He knows. He has his pulse. He has his hand on the pulse of the political climate in this city, and has for a long, long time, and the sports climate in this city. He had a talk show on Big Ways in the afternoon, and he was unbelievable.
He was a columnist for the Charlotte Observer too.
And he had his. He wrote in Carolina Blue magazine. There was a weekly paper here in town that Stan Kaplan had that he was a part of.
Hosted a coach's show with Dean.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
that was unbelievable.
Yeah. And his brother was Jimmy Kilgo,
yes,
who just passed recently.
Yes.
But Jimmy, what was it? It was Kilgo's Canteen, I think.
Yeah, he was a big personality in town that in a different bent, not in sports but in entertainment.
That time though, so when you come to BT, what year was this?
62. 82.
82.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
82. 1982. Fall of 82.
That was just such an interesting time, though, I think, for Charlotte, because I think Charlotte was still obviously a sleepy southern town. But I think the groundwork was there, right, for the city to start growing.
It was. What was happening is when I came to town, what was really starting to happen was the growth of the banking industry. And of course, there's still Hugh McCall, retired now, but I still have an NCNB checkbook. North Carolina National Bank, and that was his bank. And of course, he's grown that into Bank of America. And then there was Ed Crutchfield, who had First Union, and he grew that into what is now Wells Fargo. It's gone through several names since, and so has NCNB. But that banking was the industry that exploded, and you saw banks outstep their boundaries of the state borders, and that's what Hugh McCall did so very, very well. He took NCNB and made it a national institution, and the influx of people in the financial world to this city, it grew exponentially. And a lot of people sit there and they're very parochial and they'll say, well, the NBA and the NFL grew. No, it did.
Banking did.
No, banking.
Well, it is funny, because you tie those things back. You'd say, well, the Panthers wouldn't be here without the Hornets, which is true. But the Hornets wouldn't be here without banking, right?
Yeah,
without the city and what it became.
And the thing about it is that Charlotte, in your description, it was it was the biggest city in the state.
Yeah.
But it was, you didn't have Carolina, you didn't have NC State, you didn't have Duke, you didn't have Wake Forest and Winston-Salem. You're 65 miles away from the closest ACC campus, yet this was an ACC town.
So when you came down, you probably thought, well, I'm covering ACC basketball,
oh, yeah.
right?
ACC basketball was huge.
Yeah.
And it was huge because, one, there were only 8 teams. And for a while, there was only 7 when South Carolina left. It took them about 8 or 9 years to replace them with Georgia Tech to become an 8-team. But it didn't matter. I mean, they were doing the ACC, kind of paved the road for college basketball in this country. And I look at the success that the NBA has had in this city and it hasn't diminished really college basketball and the interest in college basketball in this town. There's always been, this has always been the magnet city. And so people say, well, Indiana is this and Kentucky's that. There is nothing like North Carolina basketball. And you look at, and the NBA following college example, the NBA coming in, leaving the city once and coming back, going through expansion twice in the NBA, I mean, in any professional league, is hard to do. And what is happening in this city has never been done in the NBA, obviously, to the degree that it's happened here. So this is truly a great market. These people in this market know the sport, and you can put it right up there on a parallel, and maybe even more so, of what Indiana and Kentucky feel their importance is to basketball in this country. North Carolina doesn't sit second place to either one.
So you called Davidson games for a little while.
Oh, I did, 4 years.
4 years.
Yep, had a blast.
And then
I did Appalachian State football for 2 years.
Did you really?
Yep, I did.
How did I never know this as an App State guy?
I did Appalachian State. It was Charlie, a guy from Greensboro, and he's not with us anymore, but he did some college basketball on television. He had to miss a game at the end of the 1984 season. The name will come to me soon. He was a Greensboro television sports personality, and he was doing Appalachian football. And I got to do our last game of their 84 season, and I did the next 2, 85 and 86. And then I caught the attention of the folks at Jefferson Pilot, where I worked at WBT, and they started a package which was the forerunner of the Big East called Great American Independent. And we had Notre Dame in the package for the first 2 years, and all of the East Indies, West Virginia, Pitt, Temple, Boston College,
Syracuse.
We had all of those schools. Did that for 4 years with a guy by the name of Bob Cassiola, who was a great friend, Princeton guy. And then they switched me. They had a guy from Pittsburgh doing the ACC, and then John Sanders, and they had me traveling up into the Big East territory.
Let's flip this. This
so
doesn't make
they
sense.
flipped it. So I came back and I did the ACC, and I did the ACC for Good 22 years.
Well, I know for me, you and then who just recently passed as well, the late John Hogwood, Mike Hogwood, excuse me.
Mike Hogwood, yeah.
Those your voices, like from my childhood, I can't think of ACC football or basketball without you or Mike.
Yeah, Mike was he was outstanding. I mean, it's so tragic that he passed so early because he had so much to give to other people, and he was doing that in working at several colleges in the area as a teacher of communications. And it's always nice to you have somebody in the business where you have a dream of getting in the business, and a lot of people don't have an idea of how to get into this business. And I think that's and I find so many people. I'm kind of against the norm, where you know what you want to do at a very early age and you get to do it. And I got to do it for 50 years. 30 of it in the NBA. I mean, so a lot of people will you'll go into, and we'll do these presentations here, and we'll have kids in their freshman and sophomore years in high school here in North Carolina, and they're trying to grapple with what they're going to do for the rest of their life, and they don't have an idea, and there's nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But you got to start to panic at some point in time. And I sit there and I said, gee, what if I didn't know what I wanted to do? What would I be doing now? I did have a semi-backup plan to what I was doing.
Which was what?
I was going to be either a history teacher or a history teacher or social studies.
So you majored in political science?
I majored in political science and history.
Yeah. I could see you being a history teacher.
I like that kind of stuff. And that would have been fine. But I got a job. I was a matter of fact, I was a junior in college at the University of Maine, and one day the station I was working at in Bangor, the guy came in and said, "How'd you like work full time?" And I'm sitting there going, "Full time? You mean with benefits?
Yeah,
I get
that sounds pretty good,
and
right?
All this stuff, and I get a salary. Yeah. What am I going to school for?" So I stopped. I tried to take a couple courses on the side, and I still continued. When I came to North Carolina, I was still going out to UNCC and trying to take maybe one or two courses. So I'm a second semester junior, and that's all I'm going to be.
That's okay though.
But I did have a 50-year career in broadcasting.
I think you turned out okay.
I think we did okay.
So when you go from Davidson, and then the next jump is the Hornets. So this franchise, when did you first hear, even just the smallest of rumblings, that, you know what, obviously Charlotte was making, a lot of cities were making bids for expansion, but when did you really start to realize, like, this might materialize and we might actually get a franchise here?
Well, there's an interesting story that goes with that. Got here in 82, and in 84, a series of things, or actually a little bit later than that, 85, 86, somewhere around there. I was doing morning sports here on WBT, and then I was doing and during the morning sports, they hired me to do television sports, and I was doing that, and
on
really,
WBT
on WBTV, and Lori Ogilvy was there, and Jim Patterson, who signed the station on in 1949. We were the morning team, and there weren't many people doing television news in the morning time, so this was kind of like a pioneer broadcast to a degree. They were just getting into it, and we were cruising right along for about a year or so, and then one tragic day, Jim Patterson got killed in an automobile accident, and it really struck the station at its core. Here is the guy who signed WBTV on in 1949, and now he's gone. And I remember there was a woman by the name of Marion McGinnis. She was running this, general manager at WBTV, and she says, "Steve, we're just going to get out of the news area for a while, so we won't be needing you." And then that same year, they dropped Davidson basketball on radio here at WBT, and I'm sitting there and I'm going, well, I'm doing the same stuff I was doing in Maine, and about making not much more.
Yeah.
And I went home to my wife and I said, okay, we've come down here, we've given it a try. I think it's time to go back home. And I literally had my hand on the phone, and it rang, and I pick it up, and it's a guy by the name of Tony Renaud. Tony Renaud was the general sales manager at WMAL in Washington, and he had just gotten the job at WBT, and he was going to come in as general manager. And he said, and I had talked to the morning guy at the time, Mike Collins, who I'd worked with, and I said, well, you know, this has happened. I guess it's time to go back to Maine. And he told Tony, and Tony said, I know you're not pleased with the way things were going, but I would like you to at least give me a week to get there, and then let's talk. So I did. We sat and we talked. He said, I got grand plans here. Nobody knew really that the NBA was coming, and George Shinn was just in the infancy. He had pursued baseball at first.
Right.
And then moved on to football, to the USFL. And he was working with Max Mulliman, and Max did a great job with George. Max was, and the movie that, it's The President, and there's a guide in the White House, and they're going, okay, we're walking, we're stopping, we're talking, we're looking at the flags on the ceiling. Now we're moving again. You know, Max did that with George. Because, you know, I mean, George is an amazing story, but one of the parts that's missing is a high-class education. You know, he didn't go, you know, he had to stop his education at an early, you know, before he got into high school, because his father passed away, and he had to become the man of the family. Very tough life. So he was an unpolished product. So Max handled him beautifully. He never let George stay in the public longer than maybe 5 minutes at a time. And then we're moving on to the next event, or doing this and doing that.
So for every great idea, there's got to be a guy who can focus in on how do we execute this,
and
right?
There was nobody better than Max at this, and he did it, and so he, you know, that's how I kind of got into it, because he was handling Jeff Bodine for Rick Hendrick, and that's how he grew his business. And then in the meantime, he knew about this guy named Richardson, who was looking at the NBA example and saying, well, maybe the idea that I've had for the NFL can happen here. And so Max had a plan, but it wasn't what George had in mind for him. So they kind of split up as soon as he got the franchise, and it wasn't a very amicable split, but there was a split nonetheless. And unfortunately for George, you got to see the unvarnished George for the rest of the time. I wondered what would have happened had Max and George stayed together, and, you know, the filter would have been on, and maybe some of the things were exposed in George's life not have been brought to light. What that would have happened. But at any rate, that's neither here nor there. But so Max was the guy that kind of got things going, and next thing you know, George brings in these partners, and they go to Phoenix, and all of a sudden they impressed people with their presentation about Charlotte so much that when it came time to announce expansion in 1987, the league said Charlotte first. That's it. We know Charlotte first. We're trying to figure out the other three, because they brought in
4 teams over 2 years.
They brought in 4 teams over 2 years. The first 2 turned out to be Charlotte and Miami, and then it was Orlando and Minnesota. But Charlotte was the lead pipe cinch. That's it. We know. We just don't know what the others are going to look like.
So BT was the flagship.
Yep.
For the Charlotte Hornets. Yep. Were you hired because you were at BT, or?
Well, as things worked out, you know, we were in what BT was shifting from a music entertainment type of thing, from the H.A. Thompson and that kind of thing, to a more information-oriented radio station.
News talk,
sports. We're going to do sports at night and stuff like that, to buffer ourselves from our regular programming, to Hello Henry at night. You know, so we were going to provide. But there was that little niche that sports was going to do, and so I was brought here to do that, And Tony was kind of pushing that toward a more full-time basis as part of the station. And then we learned how to package what we were doing on the radio station. We looked at our whole involvement. Well, we're doing like 16 sportscasts in the morning to the midday, and then in the afternoon to the evening we're doing another 14. And we've got University of North Carolina, and we got all these other things. It's very hard to go out there and sell that piecemeal in a competitive market. So you would sell sponsorships to everything that you do as a whole. And it was a revolutionary process. And the people who told us about it were people at the University of North Carolina, Village Sports. Jim Hevner, who ran Village Sports, he brought us up to Chapel Hill, and we said, well, how can we package sports to be how do you package sports? And that's how he did it. He taught us how to do it. And we had a lady who was our general sales manager by the name of Rita Thorne, and she was a big believer in sports. And we went out and marketed sports, or she went out and marketed sports. I helped her.
Yeah.
But she was the moving force of it. And it was a tremendous success because all the consultants that we talked to at WBT in the early to mid 80s said, okay, people want to know what time it is, what the weather's going on, what the news is, and you, the sports guy, you are a tertiary interest.
Yep.
That means you're on the fringe, and you're lucky you got a job.
Yeah.
So with Rita's help and her sales staff, we made sports a vehicle that they needed. And it may not be from the listener standpoint, but from a financial standpoint, yeah, well, it made sense.
And then, so the Hornets become a part of that. And then I think probably one of the other, maybe this is maybe more of an unsung story, and there are a lot of these in Hornets history, but the fact that for those that don't live around here in Charlotte or aren't as familiar with WBT, it's a flamethrower of a radio signal.
It is.
50,000 watts. They go directional at night. It literally goes from Maine all the way down to Miami. It goes directional up and down the East Coast. So you could hear Hornets games all the way up near New York City on a Wednesday night at 8 o'clock.
You can, and this is still the case, you can go into Washington, D.C. at signal change, which would be, okay, just take where local sunset is.
Yep.
For example, this afternoon you could be traveling into Washington, D.C. at quarter of 4, and your dial could be at 11:10, and all of a sudden you would hear WBT like it was a local station.
Like it's 5 feet away from
It's
you.
unbelievable, and you can't hear it in Gastonia.
It's amazing. You wonder, like, how many back in those days, how many people heard Hornets broadcasts up and down the East Coast?
Well, more important than that, it was one of the key things that a lot of people didn't realize is that Dean Smith always wanted to have WBT on the network. And that's why North Carolina was, WBT was a long time North Carolina station. And that allowed the Tar Heels to recruit the whole East Coast, back in the day. Of course, we're out of the day now, and that's the dynamic of that has changed. The dynamic of the station has changed. A lot of things have changed, but it was always fascinating, the draw that station had. That was a prize, a main recruiting tool. Because the thing about ACC basketball, which is and the one thing that I hate about college basketball as a whole, is that it's changed dramatically to the negative side because so many kids are coming in, for 1 year and that's it. They don't even have to go to school after November, really, because if they're good enough, they're gone. And it used to be that college basketball could keep their players, for as long as possible. Like college football. College football, you're in there for 3 years, and then you can leave. And I think it should be that way for college basketball.
Yep.
I think college basketball would be a much better product. It would have, and if you ever lived if you were in this region of the country in the 70s and in the early 80s, you could see how important college basketball and the ACC was in this region. It had a grip. I mean, a chokehold. It was tough for the NBA to break that through, and I don't think to a degree, as it was constructed then. The only way that you could make the NBA as important to these people here in ACC country is to take all their players away and take them into the NBA. And really, when you take a look at what Duke is doing, and to a lesser degree North Carolina, that's happening nowadays.
Yeah.
Duke's getting these guys. They're great. And really, when you think about it, when does the first semester end? Somewhere between Thanksgiving and mid-December.
Yeah.
So they have to go to school after that point? No, they don't.
So did you think when this all started to materialize in the early days, it was going? Did you think? Because I talked to Muggsy about this recently, where obviously he played in the ACC, he played at Wake, and so for him, after a year with the Bullets to come back down here as the third expansion pick, he wasn't sure, but he knew this area loved basketball.
Yeah.
And obviously that became very apparent right away. But did you have those same feelings of, well, it's a different level, it's a slightly different game, but you know what, at the end of the day, this state loves basketball, so this is going to be an absolute success?
Well,
or did you have
I didn't
doubts?
think it was going to be an absolute success, but I think what happened was, if you look at one thing, that the big tip-off was opening night in 1988. And the fact of the matter is to show how important basketball in any form was to this city, is the fact that we got beat by 40 points by Cleveland, which is a team. They were, all right. They're not the best team in the league, but they're pretty doggone good. They beat you like a drum by 40, and we had 23,800 and whatever fans there. They were still there at the end, and for the last 90 seconds of the game, and we're hopelessly out of reach, they're standing and applauding NBA basketball, and that spoke volumes to me. And then within a month, we would play the Bulls on December 23rd, and Michael Jordan came to the hall, scored 32 points, and Kurt Rambis would tip
in
a Tim Kempton stick back at the buzzer, and we would beat the Chicago Bulls. And for the next 9 years, we didn't have to worry about selling a ticket.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And a lot of things went into that. Not just the fact that you were I think one big thing is that you are an ACC market.
Yep.
And it proved that Charlotte was. No matter the fact the closest campus was 70 miles away, but this was clearly because a lot of people came here to work in the banking industry. And the other, it's not just banking, but the city grew exponentially through those years. I mean, when I got here in '82, you could go uptown, as it were, and at noon be great. Things were going crazy. 5 o'clock, you couldn't find anybody uptown. Nobody. Streets were clear. Totally different now.
Let alone finding a place to eat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, hey. Head to McDonald's out on the outskirts of the city or something, but you wouldn't find anything downtown.
So 93, do you think if you took, so if we say that team from 93, and then let's say we take the 96 Hornets, and then maybe we take, let's say the 01 Hornets, which was, now you're talking Baron Davis, David Wesley, P.J. Brown, Jamal Mashburn, Eldon Campbell. That was a good group too. Which era wins? You put in their prime, best of 7 series, original, kind of that middle era, and then the last era of Hornets basketball. Which group wins?
Well, if that's hard to say, because where are the other franchises and what are they doing at that particular time? Because a lot of success that a team enjoys depends on the type of battle they've got to face to get all the way to the top. I would submit that that team in '93. Or actually, the team in '96 had a tougher row through the East. I mean,
think about
New York was strong. Chicago obviously was strong. They were Milwaukee was the tail end of their they were a strong franchise. I mean, they were you're talking about a Milwaukee team that's maybe about 13 years removed from winning a world championship.
Yeah, you're talking Bulls, Pacers, Knicks. The Hornets are in that mix as well.
Yeah.
That was a loaded Eastern Conference at that time.
You got to look at the Nets, too.
Miami was good at that time.
Miami was, they were a little bit farther behind. They were coming.
Yeah.
They were on the same curve that we were at the time.
Yep.
We were all hanging around that, who's going to get 42 versus 44, and, something like that.
Well, and I think, too, at the end, this is the era that I remember the most vividly, because I was teenager at this time. But the Hornets teams in the early 2000s, when Barron came in and was just this electric player, had an athletic ability that we really hadn't seen before for a Hornets guard, right? I mean, just a highlight reel play, capable of it on any play. And then you had him with some veteran pieces, right? You had David Wesley.
Yep.
You had P.J. Brown. You had Eldon Campbell. Jamal Mashburn was obviously such a great talent. But the East at that point was starting to weaken, right? And I think that's why the Hornets had such success making runs into the Eastern Conference playoffs at that time.
I think you're right. You're absolutely right. And then, of course, Michael is now starting to gather some years. He was at the tail end of his dominance of this league as the game's greatest player. And so the league changed dramatically, and it got better. As a whole, the talent was spread out.
That was when the West was starting to
emerge,
the
West was,
right?
Oh, yeah, the West was starting to emerge. And, of course, you're starting to get into the David Robinson years and San Antonio and
Kobe, Shaq.
Yeah, all that. Jerry West was still manipulating the league.
Yes.
James Worthy and all these other things. And of course, Hornets benefited from that.
Yeah.
Because we everybody says, well, you gave up on Kobe Bryant. Well, you know something? Kobe Bryant was never going to come here. Kobe Bryant was, and we talk about Michael Jordan. Kobe Bryant is another of those players that comes on along with LeBron James once in a generation, maybe. And he determined that he was only going to play for 3 teams, New York, Chicago, or L.A. And that was back in the day when you were trying to bring guys in to warm them up and look at them. He refused to come to any team in the NBA except those 3. And why would you waste a draft pick on that person? So we get down into the draft that particular year, I think it was 96, and we get down into the draft, and we got our eyes on a guy by the name of Vitaly Potapenko. He's out of Dayton. Cleveland likes him too, and they're picking right ahead of us. And Jerry West talks to Bob Bass and says, you know something, I know you love Potapenko, but he's not going to be there. So if he's there, take him. But if he's not, Bob, would you consider taking Kobe Bryant? Because nobody was going to take Kobe before. New York and all these other teams are picking way down the list. And would you consider taking Kobe Bryant, and we will trade Vlade Divac and some other considerations to you, and that'll be our deal. To which Bob Bass says, okay.
Yeah.
I'm hearing the same stuff you're hearing.
Yep.
That Cleveland really loves Potapenko. So, okay, that's what we'll do. We get to that point, that's what we're doing. And sure enough, that's what happened. And Kobe strode up to the podium in New York, big smile on his face, Hornet hat in hand and on his head, because he knows full well he's never going there.
Yeah.
He's going to L.A. The deal is done. It just has to wait a day to be announced.
Well, Steve, it is a pleasure. We got to do this again because I've got so much to talk to you about, and we've.
Oh yeah, I haven't even gotten
forever.
into the second year of work here.
Yeah.
So
it has been an absolute pleasure to catch up. I'm glad you're enjoying retirement, and we can't wait. It's going to be fun Friday night, December 28th.
I hope
Steve
so.
Martin bobblehead night. You got your own bobblehead, and it plays one of your highlights.
It's right. It talks.
How great is that?
Well, I don't know. The thing hasn't gotten stuck yet, so.
Well, when I tell you what, we get, I've seen a couple advanced copies. Bobbleheads sometimes, maybe or maybe not, they look like their likeness. This one looks just like you, I think.
And it's not hard to make a player bald. Really, it's pretty easy. You don't have to worry. Well, how does he wear his hair? He doesn't have any hair, so you have to worry about how he wears it.
Enjoy retirement. I'll catch up with you in a little bit. I won't bother you for a few more months.
All right, good enough.
All right, that's Courtside Seats, our Charlotte Hornets podcast. If you've missed any of our previous episodes of Courtside Seats, you can find us on Apple Podcasts. Just search Courtside Seats. You could search my name, Kroeger, Kroeger, Charlotte Hornets. You'll find us. Just click subscribe. You can review us too, rate us, and that'll push us up the charts on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on YouTube, on our Charlotte Hornets YouTube channel. All sorts of great Hornets content there, and basically available anywhere else podcasts can be found. So Stitcher, you can find us in iHeartRadio as well, Spotify, we're everywhere. We'll catch you guys back here next week, another edition of Courtside Seats.